My name is Marcia Donay. I'm the Capacity Building Director at the Ballot Initiative Strategy Center. And for those who don't know us, BISC is a nationwide movement building infrastructure organization that is focused on building durable state power through the entire 360 ballot measure lifecycle. That means organizing year-round over multiple years and using ballot measures as a tool to build power and make progressive change. Our vision includes a plan for winning each effort, while also developing a long-term alignment, engaging in strategic planning with both national and state-based partners, and pushing the ecosystem to a standard of winning that is beyond 50+1. It's about building durable, independent political power in the states. And our theory of change is rooted in a decade of research and 4 electoral cycles of deep analysis of hundreds of ballot measure campaigns and thousands of stakeholders. And from this experience, we know that building state-based power alongside state leaders is the key to strengthening our democracy and creating real change for all of us. And our job is to provide the systems and tools to support state organizations and leaders to build that independent political power in their states. So today, we are going to be talking about the strategic imperatives based on our latest learnings from the 2022 election cycle that ballot measure leaders must employ to be successful. So let's just start off very quickly grounding ourselves in what happened in 2022. Since 2016, we have seen an uptick in progressive, proactive ballot measure efforts succeed. We see 2022 as a continuation of this success, despite greater and greater obstacles to overcome along the way. For the November 8th, 2022 general election, there were 132 statewide measures in 37 states, plus DC had a citywide measure. Of those measures, only 30 of them were citizen-led, which is one of the things we're going to talk about momentarily. And BISC monitored the results of 68 priority measures. And what we found was that progressive ballot measure efforts were hugely successful, even in red states, and especially in issue areas where voters were most concerned, like income and inflation and reproductive rights. These wins were built over a decade of intentional work with partners and stakeholders through BISC's own work and within the coalitions in state. And they applied the previous lessons and best practices that we were sharing based on our analysis of different elections. But because of the success of grassroots and communities of color effectively wielding the people's tool, we are seeing escalated attempts to subvert the ballot measure process, especially in red states where we passed progressive issues like in Missouri, Arizona, Mississippi, and Florida. And these escalated abuses of power by the GOP, coupled with interconnected post-pandemic events causing unprecedented spikes in the cost of ballot measure campaigns, raises the stakes moving forward. And as a result, we're seeing an increased interest in ethical democracy issues and high intensity by voters to hold accountable elected officials and Supreme Court justices who try to limit, block, and overturn the will of the people. But despite all these challenges, our success at the ballot and the urgency of the moment are fueling momentum for early and more collaborative planning around 2024 measures and beyond. So what worked? Well, that long-term planning and building around the 360 ballot measure life cycle, which often covers 5 or more years of preparations. The coalitions that have been working together for many years and thinking strategically about the issues that need to be moved and the sequencing of efforts are having more success. We are also seeing that when we center directly impacted communities in campaigns, especially around exploratory research, policy development, communications, field, and campaign leadership, we're not only winning on the ballot, but we're also investing in and building long-term power to keep winning long after Election Day. And when we leverage the power and efficiencies connected to things such as interplay research or coordinating our campaign strategies, we not only see more success, but we're getting to efficiencies of scale and saving ourselves money, which allows us to do deeper investments in grassroots organizing, community building, and be better prepared for the inevitable legal challenges that will come up. And we also saw in this 2022 cycle something that BISC has been talking about for a while. When we go proactive on defense, we are more likely to win. And so what we saw was those who went proactive on defense built capacity for future offense and seeded the soil through escalating narrative strategies that were intentionally designed to shift hearts and minds and begin to normalize bold policies that they can have on deck for future cycles. Many of the policies that we are talking about throughout our conference today. And we saw that when we invest in defending direct democracy, the people are with us. They want to be able to continue to use the people's tool to pass bold policies. And my colleagues, Gina Byrne and Sarah Walker, will actually be talking about the strategies that you all can employ to defend direct democracy later this afternoon. But 2022 did not come without its challenges. We saw costs skyrocket due to both internal and external factors related to our movement. Some of the internal factors were ongoing issues with burnout in our movement, and over-reliance on a limited number of paid signature collection firms, the increased cost of ongoing legal challenges as our opposition becomes more and more aggressive. And we saw some external factors such as ongoing supply chain issues or changing relationship to work as a result of the pandemic. We also saw late money come at critical junctures of the qualification and campaign phases, which exacerbated these costs. And this late money caused severe qualification disruptions and underfunded grassroots efforts during GOTV and during the campaign phase. And our continued over-reliance on a limited number of paid firms and a lack of effective quality control and accountability measures for signatures actually resulted in some of the most well-resourced ballot measure campaigns not being able to qualify for the ballot. We also saw a continuation of misinformation and disinformation and conservative narratives take hold, especially when they weren't countered with a coordinated narrative from our campaigns and progressives. We also continue to see escalating abuses of power by elected officials and corporations. And as I briefly mentioned, there's been a loss of talent from a burnout crisis, especially during the transitions that happen between legislative defensive fights to ballot measure qualification, and then continued transitions to the campaign phase, and then to incubation for future campaigns. And our lack of capacity and sustainability models leads to a loss of talent and negative outcomes for campaigns, and a reduced ability for us to build that durable long-term power that we need to continue to be successful. So what do we do about this? Well, we double down on the things that worked, and we begin to address the things that aren't. That means that we need earlier and more investment in the incubation phase so that the coalitions who are leading this work can build the strong foundation that they need to be able to navigate the various challenges that are going to come up in the subsequent phases. We need to shift our qualification phase timelines earlier and invest in grassroots signature collection. These timelines are important because they allow us to have a longer on-ramp to get our signatures to scale. They allow us to spread our costs out across this longer timeline, so that way we are being able to better deal with our cash flow. And it's really important to invest in that grassroots signature collection, because that is how we build durable power. And grassroots signatures tend to have a higher validity rate than the paid signatures. And that is because these are people who are organizing out in their communities. They know where to go. They have those relationships, and therefore they are able to collect the signatures that we need to withstand the inevitable legal challenges. And we need tighter quality control and accountability mechanisms for signature gathering. That means that we need to not just assume that things are going the way they are, but actually test and check in along the way. Make sure we know where we're at in progress to goal for both the paid side and the grassroots side throughout the entire qualification process. We also need to grow the C4 funding community that resources ballot measure work. There's a limited number of funders on the C4 side who are investing in these early phases, and we need to expand that so that these organizations and coalitions can have that foundational building that they need to be successful. We also need to build a deeper partnership between C3 funders, C4 funders, and the field to better sequence funding throughout the 360 life cycle. Many C3 funders don't know or are uncomfortable with how they might be able to engage in ballot measures, but there's actually a lot that they can do, particularly in these early phases when folks are building that foundation, doing some initial issue education or policy exploration. We need stronger legal strategies to protect our efforts. As I said, there are inevitably going to be legal challenges throughout this process. The qualification phase is the most common place for legal challenges as our opposition attempts to keep our measures off the ballot, whether that be challenging signatures, looking at campaign finance challenges, or even looking at things like how petitions are printed. But we also see post-campaign, once we have won our policies on the ballot, we also see an uptick in legal challenges following that, in efforts to block or prevent the implementation of these policies. And so we need to be able to be building budgets that incorporate the entire 360 life cycle and include budgets for implementation and defense. We need to explore accountability campaign strategies as voters call for more ethical democracy in response to these escalated abuses of power by conservatives. That means that we need to be monitoring and tracking and demonstrating the support that we have for our issues. And once we get into that implementation phase, make sure those who are in charge of setting the rules, who are in charge of funding these programs, who are in charge of making sure these things happen, know where their constituents stand. And then we also need deeper investment in intersectional narrative work to have a unified, impactful counter narrative to misinformation, disinformation, and this anti-woke narrative. It is unrealistic to expect one campaign to counter all of the misinformation, disinformation that we have been seeing about our democracy. But when we work together and we show up in a united front, we all can fight back and push back together. And then we need to make sure that we are connecting more resources to grassroots organizations so that they have greater staff sustainability and fiscal autonomy to be able to continue building on these successes and making sure that our movement continues to grow and that we aren't losing essential talent to burnout. And what can you do right now? Well, some of you might be looking at opportunities for 2024 to be able to put some of these bold policies directly to voters. If that's the case, then you need to be working now to align your coalition around who is being centered and how that is showing up in your campaigns. We can't just assume that because we say what our values are, that they're being implemented. We need to actually back that up with agreements around the behaviors that we're going to put in place. As I said, we need to be building our grassroots signature collection infrastructure now. We need those longer on-ramps. And grassroots signature collection isn't free. That takes resources. That takes time. Those programs need to be managed, and those volunteers and supporters need to be have relationships built with them so we can continue to work with them and pivot that work from the qualification phase into the campaign phase and beyond. We also need to make sure that we start signature collection as soon as possible. Like I said, we want longer timelines. We want longer on-ramps to being able to scale up. So that looks like getting all of your ducks in a row and, when possible, being able to start signature collection in 2023, starting it in the next few months. So that way you are able to collect the signatures you need and submit them earlier in the 2024 cycle. That's going to give you the timeline that you need to be able to navigate any legal challenges, while also making sure that you are setting your campaign phase up for success. The longer on-ramp you have for the campaign phase, that's the longer amount of time that you can have conversations with voters, that you can be making sure that your supporters and volunteers are getting the support they need and being able to continue to scale up. It's also important to note that ballot measures do not have the same protections for communications time as candidates. So also, by being ready to launch your campaign phase earlier, you can actually purchase things like your TV ad buys, radio ad buys, or whatever it is earlier before things get too crowded and the costs become unmanageable. And that speaks directly to building a budget that is reflective of the true cost of your effort and doing the fundraising that you need now. So when we say building a budget that's reflective of the true cost, I mean, we're talking about the entire 360 life cycle. What's it going to take to do the exploration that you need to be able to determine if this is the right policy and the right time to move forward? What does your coalition need to be able to engage in this effort? When we talk about the grassroots signature collection, what do those organizations need to be able to scale up and invest in this work and sustain themselves even after the qualification phase is over? If we want to center directly impacted communities in this work, who are those individuals or those organizations, and what resources do they need to be able to sit at that decision-making table? And like I said, we need to be building in that post-campaign budget as well. What's it going to take to make sure that this policy is implemented, that you can defend it, and that you can navigate legal challenges? All of that needs to be built into a holistic budget. And even when you're having grassroots groups in-kind efforts, you should have that reflective of reflected in your budget. Our budgets are values documents and tell us and tell our funders and our stakeholders what we care about. And it's also really appealing to a funder to say, when we go to them and say, we want you to be part of give us $3 million to be part of a $6 million campaign where half of that is being contributed by the grassroots organizations, versus we want you to fund the whole campaign at $3 million because we aren't reflecting that grassroots contribution. And then finally, we need to be planning now for our strategies to defend direct democracy. And like I said, my colleagues will be talking about how you can do that later this afternoon. And for those of you who maybe aren't pursuing a ballot measure at this time, but are looking at doing something with a longer on-ramp from here, so 2026, 2028, or further along, this is the time now to begin that policy narrative and organizing opportunities and threats assessments. You want to be building in the time to make sure that you're exploring this from every angle and making sure that those who are most impacted by these policies are engaged in this process and a part of the leadership and guidance and decision-making around what you pursue and when. This is also the time to build that coalition with that focus on equity and directly impacted people in leadership. So again, we talked about budgets for 2024. What's it going to take to resource campaigns or organizations to be able to show up in the way that they want to and that we need them to? How can we build that timeline now to fundraise and give them those resources so when we get to the actual campaign phase, they have what they need? We as a coalition have what we need to be successful. And of course, continue building those strategies for defending direct democracy. If we want to achieve these bold policy wins, especially in states where the ballot measure is the only tool for moving forward, then we need to make sure that we have the initiative process in place. And I understand not every state has citizen-initiated ballot measure processes, but for those that do, we need to make sure that we are defending it every step of the way. And also for those of you who are in who don't have the citizen-initiated ballot measure process, how are you thinking about the opportunities that are going to come up over the next couple of years to ensure that you have a legislature that you can potentially work with to refer something to the ballot? So we need to be thinking about this on a long-term vision. What is the vision that we have for our state, and what are the policies we need to change to get there? And thinking through, is a ballot measure the right tool, and is this the right time to move that forward? And of course, BISC is here to support you throughout this process. We have an entire resource library that houses ballot measure information, ranging from past campaign materials to debriefs to best practices. It is a unique resource. There's nothing else like this that is fully focused on ballot measures. We also provide direct one-to-one strategic assistance for ballot measure efforts all across the country. So we're able to not only dig in and be a strategy partner with you on what you're facing in this real time, but also be able to pull in those best practices and lessons learned from our 25 years of experience as an organization. And then we have 2 learning cohorts that might be of interest to you. Our first is a skills building cohort. This is open to anybody within our progressive movement who is interested in ballot measure campaigns. We meet bi-monthly and we share out the latest learnings, skills building opportunities, best practices that you can be employing at this time. And our peer-to-peer cohort, which is designed for folks who are actively leading on campaigns in this moment, to be able to learn and share together, work through challenges, celebrate highlights, and continue to build stronger campaigns as we move through this process. So to get connected to BISC, you can reach us at bisc@ballot.org, but we will also be having an office hours later this afternoon at 4 o'clock. And I would love to meet you, talk with you about what you're considering, and be able to dig into some of these best practices in more detail. So with that, I'm going to stop there and see if there are any questions in the chat. Anders, I see the universal healthcare passage in Red County. Congratulations. That is amazing. Yes, Hillary Ann. Yes, the work that Hillary Ann led and the coalition led to defeat LR 131 is amazing. They are definitely a model for how we do this in a way that is centering and our communities that we are serving, that really focuses on how do we build long-term power and not just continue to engage in the traditional transactional approaches, but what is it that's going to help us win while also building the power we need. So shout out to Hillary Ann. Dawn, I see your question. Oh, Amy answered it in the chat about C3 and C4 funders. For those who are not following, the IRS designates, Amy, I'm just reading your answer because it was spot on. C3 and C4 are IRS designations determining how money can be raised and spent. So a lot of nonprofits are 501c3 organizations, and they have designations on how they can spend their money and limitations on what is called direct lobbying, which ballot measures are considered. 501c4 organizations are advocacy groups who can spend on advocacy efforts and lobbying. And so a lot of the organizations that lead ballot measures have a 501c4, though there are activities that 501c3 organizations can engage in. See. Roger, I see your question about get a plan to increase the number of states that have the ballot initiative process. That is an ongoing conversation. And, we as BIS don't have a clear stance on it at this point because it's very state by state and situation by situation. Anything that we open up for us to be able to do, our opposition can leverage as well. And so we need to be thoughtful about if and when we work to increase access to the initiative process by adding more states, because of the types of policies or where we might not have the progressive infrastructure to be able to leverage this tool, and actually might put ourselves on even more defense than we already have. Not to say that we shouldn't do it. I mean, that's not a reason not to do it, but it's a consideration to have. So it is an ongoing conversation that BISC has been a part of. Let's see. Are there any alternatives to ballot referendums that create similar impact on the discourse? It's just had a lot of our ability to do advisory referendum taken away from the GOP. Andrew, I'm not entirely sure what you mean by this question. You're talking about like the narrative building work? If that's the case, then, there's lots of opportunities around issue education to be building out your ongoing organizing work, leveraging key moments and political moments and moments in the news to connect with what's happening locally and the impact that these policies have. Your legislative session, of course, continues to be an opportunity to impact discourse. Another thing that we see, a lot of states that don't have statewide ballot measures may actually still have county level or municipal ballot measure opportunities. And so that is a strategy we're seeing employed more and more, where folks are turning to the local level to be able to build momentum and shape that conversation around what is possible. Hey, Christopher, I see the question about the measure to stop Cop City in Atlanta. I myself am not involved in that effort, but my colleagues who have been involved in those conversations. And so I am happy to connect you with folks who are much more connected to that effort. Hey, folks, did I miss any? Any other questions? Anybody else want to shout out the great work they've done? Put in the chat. Police accountability in Texas, 80-20. Woo! Yes, the effort that is happening in Florida to collect signatures is phenomenal. And y'all, when we talk about investing in grassroots signature collection in partnership with a paid program, they are doing it there. The grassroots signature collection is really impressive, and they are bringing in numbers. So shout out to Florida. Yes to marijuana legalization in South Dakota. Yes to minimum wage in Nebraska last year. Absolutely. And folks are building on that effort, and they just started signature collection for a paid sick leave measure in Nebraska. So really great to see the continuation and building and sequencing of efforts happening in that state. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much for your time, and really appreciate you sharing your wins, your celebrations in the chat. And like I said, there will be an office hours later today. So looking forward to continuing the conversation there.